Welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
If you work in a role where you provide tax services, at some point you will likely be faced with the requirement to win client work, or in other words, sell to clients. But as a tax professional, this is not what we're trained to do. It's one of those things we are just expected to pick up on the job, but it is absolutely paramount that you are able to win client work if you want to make it to senior manager or above, generally speaking. It will be even more important if you are looking to set up your own practice in the future. This is why I thought it would be great to invite Martyn Sloman, the non-pushy sales trainer, onto the podcast. Describing himself as the non-pushy sales trainer stood out to me, as I've held back myself in the past over fear of coming across as pushy. Maybe you've experienced this too. In this episode, Martyn provides lots of great information to help you increase the chances of winning client work whilst being professionally persistent, as Martyn put it, but not pushy. Let's get to it. Hi Martyn, thanks for joining me today and welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast.
Hi Jack, you're very welcome. Thanks a lot for the invite.
No problem at all. So just for the listeners, could you just give a little explanation of what you do and how you help people?
Yes, so I'm Martyn Sloman and my business is Gold Dust Sales Training, and my nickname is the non-pushy sales trainer. What I do is I help individuals and businesses, large and small, to improve their confidence and performance when it comes to sales. So that can mean that I might be invited into a business to do some sort of program where we do development over a period of time, some practical sessions and coaching and so on, or it could be short workshops, or it could be one-to-one coaching. Excellent.
And so that's quite a nice thing to talk about yourself as being the non-pushy sales trainer. So how's that come about then?
Well, one of the challenges that when you use the word selling is that it conjures up all sorts of pictures in your mind, and it tends to be that most people tend to sort of shy away from the idea of selling because it kind of harkens back to the sort of cheesy, pushy, double glazing or car salesperson of the 80s with the shiny suit. And I can't stand that whole approach. I think it's tired out, and it's the opposite of what I try to provide in terms of advice and help for my customers. And so by having that nickname, I think people tend to resonate with it, and they see it on my card and they go, oh yeah, right, okay, that's exactly what I want to be like. I don't want to be pushy, so I think it's a reassurance for people.
Yeah, and it absolutely is for me as well, working in an accountancy firm, because I think most of us are not trained in sales in any way. We're trained as accountants or tax advisors. Sales is completely alien to us, and one of the things a lot of people worry about is coming across as pushy. So it really stood out for me. So it's working for lots of people. So for everyone who hasn't guessed yet, for the episode today, we're going to be talking about kind of winning work and having some tips to help you better win work and other clients. So if you're ready, Martyn, we can jump into some of the questions about sales.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I think when people think about selling, especially when they're not trained in it, it may make them feel a bit apprehensive, the thought of actually doing this. It was definitely the case for me when I first had to start doing a few calls that were of a salesy type nature. From your experience, why do you think the thought of selling does this to people?
Yeah, I think people tend to what tends to happen is they tend to get a feeling. There's a bit of an emotion attached to it. If they've got to do something new or something that's slightly out of their comfort zone, apprehension is a natural thing to occur, and so then we start to think of reasons why we shouldn't do this thing, and we start to think of the things that might go wrong, and then we start to think, actually, maybe this isn't a positive thing. and we start to justify reasons why. And so then we think, well, okay, why is selling not a positive thing? And we think about our own negative sales experiences, perhaps where we've had bad service, or perhaps where we feel we've been missold something, or it wasn't a great experience. And so those negative emotions culminate, and we immediately believe, we sort of catastrophize that the interaction isn't going to go well, which is kind of crazy because it hasn't actually taken place yet. We've just imagined that, and so it's understandable because we don't want it to be an adverse experience. So we go into protection mode, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think you're right. The experiences that some of us have had with sales haven't been great in the past, but one of the things I think maybe people don't realise is that their service is valuable to someone, and therefore talking to them about it and giving them that opportunity for you to support them in that way is actually helpful. So as well as apprehensions, and what misconceptions do you think comes into people's minds when they're first challenged with needing to win work or sell in some way?
Oh, all sorts. There's so many things that go through your mind. What if they're not there? What if I sound nervous? What if they don't like the sound of my voice? What if they're too busy? What if this isn't of interest to them? What if I, completely mess this up? There's all these what if scenarios that kind of pop into our mind. Or what if they've decided to do something else? There's so many variables on that. And so the way to get around that is to turn that upside down, and instead to think of all the reasons why the interaction would be positive. So they are going to be available. Perhaps I've got some additional information I can help them with, which they hadn't considered before. Perhaps I've got something which actually is good timing. Perhaps, this is actually going to be helpful for them, their business. And immediately you start to, if you like, create an opportunity, because you're moving in the direction of that, and it's like you're creating that partnership with them, and because you believe it's the right thing to do, that comes across in your voice, and that makes you more convincing overall. People tend to hear the sincerity and the helpfulness in our voice, and that's the thing that will get the other party to listen and to consider perhaps what it is that we want to share with them.
Yeah.
I think that what tends to happen is we put too much pressure on ourselves, and perhaps expect too much out, and perhaps try to plan too much. And if we just take the pressure off and think, well, okay, I've got some information for these people. I believe it's going to be helpful for them. I believe I can, share the advice in the right way. I've done this before, or, I've got colleagues' experience who I can leverage in my business. And so if I don't share this information with the other person, well, they won't know about it, and that might not be helpful for their decision making. So why don't I just give them a call, or why don't I just get in touch with them, and at least they can consider what I've got to say.
Yeah, I think that kind of forms part of building that relationship with that person, even if they don't want to purchase something with you. Do you think a lot of people, when they first start thinking about winning work and stuff, do you think they kind of brush over the importance of a relationship, even by just giving them that useful information that's still useful to them, isn't it? So it can help with that.
Definitely. Yeah. I really believe that the relationship bit is vital, and that's why it's important to get comfortable with what you're saying and what you're doing. And perhaps for people who are apprehensive about doing anything that's a sales related, or could perceive to be a sales related activity, it's to think about it from the customer's perspective, rather than think about our own apprehensions or fears or concerns, and just to think about what opportunities it could create for the customer, and how it'll be better benefit for them to consider it. And by doing it that way, it then comes across, rather than it being a transaction from a sales perspective, it's more of a piece around relationship building, like you say, or giving advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So because of these kind of apprehensions and misconceptions, I imagine a lot of people make some big mistakes when they first come into the need to
Sure.
win relationships and, win work. So what are some of the big mistakes that you see people making when you're doing your training?
Okay. So there's three core mistakes which people tend to make in business. So this isn't just salespeople. This is in any form of communication or interaction where we need to move towards some kind of outcome. So the majority of interactions, usually will drive towards some sort of outcome, contributing to a decision somewhere down the line, whether that be in the short term or long term. And so those three mistakes are that they don't plan enough before the meeting or interaction or conversation. They don't ask good enough questions. In other words, they need to plan better questions for that piece of communication. And then the third piece, which is massive, this is huge, is that they don't establish mutually agreed actions whilst in the current moment. So they don't establish mutually agreed actions whilst in that current moment. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is too often people are really, really keen to serve and be helpful and say, right, okay, I'll do that for you. I'll raise that information. I'll create that document for you. I'll do this for you. I'll do this background stuff for you. I'll create that. I'll send you that. We'll give you this. We'll give you this report, and so on and so on and so on. Whatever it might be, we'll do this quote for you. We'll create this proposal, and they put blood, sweat, and tears and love into it, and they haven't checked with the other party perhaps thoroughly enough that that's the right thing to do. And so the other party just agrees. They go, oh, right, okay, fine, because they just feel that that's normal. Meanwhile, we go away, the people who are serving go, fantastic, that went really, really well. I've got to create this, and then I'll put all that together for them, and then it'll be fantastic. And then we can speak from there. And the other party goes, okay, well, that's interesting. Perhaps we're looking at other options too in their minds. So there's already a kind of disparity there.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do, what's really, really vital in any interaction, is to say, as part of the summary, is to say, great, so we've covered this, we've done that, are you happy with all those things? Is there anything else you think that I should know, or is there any other information I can provide you around this, or anything I can clarify? Great. So from here, what I would normally do is this. What will be, from your perspective, what will be the things that you need to do in the meantime before we speak next? And there are other questions that we can ask to gauge the buy-in, which I can share further with you on this podcast, which can really help to tune into the motives of the other party and to find out how serious they are, or perhaps to uncover any concerns they've got at that current moment.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one to kind of figure out what's on their mind at the minute, what's important to them, because I think a lot of people probably do brush over that, including myself. It doesn't seem like an easy thing to do. What type of questions do you think could be asked to help kind of fathom that out?
Okay, so there are some questions which I'll share now, which initially might seem quite bold or quite challenging, but they're really, really useful. And if you have concerns or apprehension about them, it's important to think about how you ask the question. So let me dive straight into it. So let's say, for instance, you were at the moment considering some form of sales training for your business, and I know that typically when we make a decision in business for a provider, we might look at potentially 3 providers, so we can weigh up some options. But we don't ask enough around that when we're in the moment with the prospect or the customer. So one of the questions you can ask is, I appreciate you've been chatting to me today, and it's been great to understand a bit more about your business, and naturally would love to help you a bit more. Just out of curiosity, what other options are you considering?
Yeah.
Now, we're not asking them to tell us who the other potential providers are. We're just saying, what other kinds of options are you considering? So there are various answers to that. It could be that they're looking at, another sales training provider and another sales training provider. But equally, there's another option which they're also considering. And that's the most common decision that's made in business, which is to stay as you are. So that's actually another option which doesn't get asked about enough in these interactions. So we kind of expect the tangible other option, in other words, the other two providers, but we don't necessarily expect or ask about the decision to stay as you are, which also is the decision to do nothing. And that's the most common decision that's made in business. Oh yeah, it's the time, when you get that response, oh yeah, we've decided to just keep things as they are for the moment.
So if you were to ask those questions then, and in that meeting, they said one of the options is to stay as we are, is that a red flag, or is it still an opportunity at that point?
It's definitely still an opportunity at that point, because there may be some information that perhaps we haven't communicated well enough to them, or that we've missed, which might, if you like, stimulate them to consider not staying as they are. So, I appreciate you staying as you are is certainly something that you could do. Could I just ask, what would be your reasons for deciding to do that? Another way to ask that is to say something like, is there any reason why you might not decide to do this? And I was doing a workshop a little while back, and a lady who her main customer was project managers. And she actually said, no, I'm not going to ask that question. And so I said to her, would you mind letting me know why? What's your concern? She said, well, it's too pushy. And so I said to her, okay, have you ever asked that question before? And she went, well, no. And I went, okay, well, how do you know it's too pushy? She said, because I feel it's too pushy. And I went, okay, but is your opinion the same as your prospects or your customers? And so the lady said, well, no. And I said to her, okay, I'd encourage you to ask that question, because the information you get back is so helpful, and it's so helpful for you and your customer, because it will tell you how you need to interact with them going forward. Because if it turns out that they genuinely will not move forward for whatever reasons within the business, then if you don't find that out, you're just going to keep calling them and following up and emailing and getting all kinds of no radio silence. And they're going to think, oh, there's that email, there's another email, there's a call, there's a missed call, there's another missed call. So which is worse? And so the lady that the next day sent me an email, which was entitled OMG. So I opened it and she said, thanks so much. I asked the question of the project manager, and I said, we went through our normal interaction. And at the end I said, okay, so Jack, is there any reason why this might not go ahead? And the project manager said, yes, there might be, because of these reasons. And so the lady said to me, I got so much tangible information I would never have otherwise got, and understood so much more about their business if I didn't ask that question. So sometimes the questions that seem bold or daunting are just because they're less familiar to us, or just because we've not perhaps used them so often, or perhaps it's our own feelings that are getting in the way of actually getting a helpful response. So when asking about staying as you are, the way to phrase that is to say, is there any reason why you might not go ahead, or is there any reason why this might not happen?
So the information then that you get from that, then could you potentially use that then to tailor your services more to maybe fit more what they might want, if that was a potential issue? Or would you just use it to figure out how to communicate with them going forward?
It depends on their response. I would say, because you've kept the conversation going and they're still interacting with you, that means that the doors of communication are still open, and so it's perfectly reasonable to keep that conversation going, keep asking at that point. So if they've shared with you, yeah, there could be some things going on in the business which could prevent us from doing this. It might be that some of those things are beyond our influence or beyond their influence. Or it could be that there are concerns which we can perhaps offer reassurances to. And in which case, if it is that it's down the route of concerns, we just have to say, what would be the reasons for, not going ahead? If you wouldn't mind sharing that with me, what would be the things that you have concerns about? What would be the potential barriers for this? It might be that we can do something to shift and work around those and to provide a solution, or it might be that actually, it's something that gets revisited at a later stage. Certainly it's worth challenging in a positive way.
Yeah, they're definitely useful questions. I think I'll give them a go myself when I get the opportunity to. Just coming back to kind of before you speak to someone, and you said people tend to not plan enough. What do you think should go into that preparation in order to plan for that call or meeting with someone?
Okay. Yeah. So we don't want to overplan, but my experience is that people tend to underplan, so they tend to sort of steam in with just a kind of overview. They might kind of do a little bit of research about the prospect or the customer and think, oh yeah, they're this type of business, and we've done this kind of thing for this, that, someone similar before, so they'll probably have these kinds of issues, and that's something I know that I can help with, and they're probably going to ask these kinds of questions, and we could be right. Or equally, they could just be huge assumptions. And so the key to it is that it's good to be familiar with, business sectors and industries and scenarios and so on. However, we should always check all the time, so we should say, okay, well, I think it's going to be this, but I need to check that, And so one of the easiest things you can do is to just think about, okay, what do I want to get out of this meeting or interaction or piece of communication? What does the customer want to get out of it? So think about your particular outcomes and expectations, and then think about their outcomes and expectations. And I'd make sure that early on in an interaction that we actually ask that and just say, hey, Jack, thanks very much for inviting me along. Naturally, I'd like to understand a little bit more about your objectives, but what is it you're looking to perhaps get out of this call today? Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see how I can help you do that. So it's being respectful of their time and helping them to be clear with what it is that they want from you at that point, what's going to be helpful for them at that moment with whatever challenge that they've got going on. So that's the initial bit of preparation. I tend to recommend having a little document or a framework or a little kind of agenda to work by, because the next piece you move on to is key questions. And so if we rely on just our experience, we that can serve us well, but equally we can go into sort of autopilot, and sometimes we can miss things. So we're all human, and no matter how expert we are at what we do, there are times when we put down the phone or drive away or sort of leave a meeting and go, why didn't I ask that? And the amount of times that happens. So this is where this agenda can really work for you, because if you think, okay, what's the question I need to have asked, above all, before I walk away? Now, there are ways of getting around that, because sometimes we might just think to ourselves, I didn't write that question down, and I know I had a great question for them. What was it? And you're trying to still remain calm, but you're inside, you're pedaling away. And so a great thing to ask there is to say, is there anything else you think I should know? Or you can say something like, that's really helpful so far. Great. Have we missed anything? And that acts as a really helpful, friendly kind of prompt for them to say, well, actually, yes. How about this? Do you provide this service? Or how would that work? Or perhaps you can give us more information on this piece you were talking about. Now, the other piece as well, whilst we're talking about questions, is to check periodically with them as well, because we can because we're the experts of what we do, we can talk for England, about our favourite subject, and that can be helpful or not for them. And so it's good to break it up into chunks and to gauge their understanding level. So you give you ask a few questions, get their response and how they feel about it and what's going on in their business relating to whatever that topic is. And we might give a further response or give some further detail. And then we want to chunk it and we want to just check with them that they're still with us. So we'll just say something like, does that make sense? We've talked about this so far and we talked about that, and does that bit make sense? Okay, great. And then we might go on and do a further chunk, and then we might say, okay, so what I've understood from you is this, X, Y, and Z. Is that right? Have I got that right? And you're giving them the opportunity to ask further questions or correct you, or even raise concerns. And you can handle those as you walk through the conversation. So there's a piece on questions there. So we've got the need to do better planning, the need to ask better questions, and then that piece around establishing mutual actions whilst in the current moment.
Yeah, I think because as soon as you walk away from that meeting as well, what you tend to get, I suppose, less receptive responses from people. So I suppose taking advantage when you're there with them, that's the best time, isn't it, to get that information from them?
Oh, it really is. Yeah, it's so is, Jack, because whilst you're in that moment, then it's particularly on an initial interaction, at the early interactions, that's when people will share the most with you. And something that's really important for us to remember is we sometimes feel like we're outstaying our welcome, or we sometimes feel, I shouldn't really ask too much because they've been so good and they've shared so much information with us. But again, that's our inner voice being unhelpful. Really what's going on is that we're asking loads of questions and they're happy to share. So as long as they're happy to continue sharing, we should keep asking until we've, if you like, kind of satisfied that piece. And, we can then move on to, whatever the next bit might be. So I would really stress to anyone that's listening to this that if you feel like you're asking too many questions, but the conversation's still flowing, just remember it's not about you, it's about them. So if they're happy to continue sharing, that's great news, because it means that they're bought into your expertise and they appreciate the information and the opinion you're sharing, and also the direction that the conversation's going in. So the trust is really forming.
It goes to show, doesn't it, actually, when it comes to talking to people though about buying potential services, that you kind of have so many biases in your head and start making presumptions of what they're thinking, when really you could either just ask to get the answer, or you say take cues from their body language or how they're responding to you. It's really useful. So one of the things that kind of to help someone with is when it will save them money in some way by reducing their tax bill, in our case being in the tax profession. But then there's some other types of work that are more difficult to talk to people about, because maybe they've made an error in relation to their tax and you're going to help them to correct that. So they've already got a tax liability, and then they're potentially going to have to pay you to correct it for them as well. And there's lots of other scenarios like that. And actually in the tax profession now, there's lots more of that coming about, because tax planning is becoming more and more restricted as time goes on. Have you got any tips that can kind of help in relation to that latter situation to give a higher chance of converting someone into, or converting a piece of work?
Yeah, so just to help me out on that scenario, does this mean that they've potentially made a mistake which now is going to cost them either through penalty and or you're paying for your consultancy to put it right? Or is it a case of you're looking to work with them and you're sort of looking to mitigate the likelihood of that happening? Which scenario are you talking about?
The first one, but I suppose I'm just generally speaking about situations where you're not helping them to save money. But in the situation you're talking about there, there's still benefits of us helping them to correct an error, for example, because if they do that properly, then it reduces the likelihood and the size of penalties, for example. So there are benefits of it, but there's still a cost at the end of it, and it's not tax saving.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the first thing there, again, it comes down to behaviour, and that is to make sure that we are sincere and helpful about it. And I think put ourselves in their shoes and just say, well, hang on a second, they're this business. They're a good business. They're growing. They've got a nice culture. They've made this mistake in whatever way it was with how they filed something. And so as a result of that, they've now got, whatever penalty it is. How are they going to be feeling? Well, not particularly good, because no one likes getting a penalty, and certainly no one likes paying more in tax than they would have to. And so right now their emotion is sort of pretty negative. They're perhaps feeling a bit foolish. They're perhaps there's some concerns now, because now they've got to find and allocate some monies to this. And so there's that piece first of all. And so I would say that the first way to influence that is to just level with them. And I'd pile in the empathy and just, think, okay, if it was me and if I was in your shoes, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What would I want to hear? I don't want to hear a solution straight away. I don't want to hear someone come on the phone and say, right, okay, so you've been hit with this penalty. That's because you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you didn't do that and you forgot to do that and that deadline was missed. So as a result, despite, the fact that you've had other emails which you say you've had, but you're claiming you didn't, then that means this is going to cost you. And in order to put that all right, this is what it's going to cost you. And there's this amount which you also need to take into account. So, how do you now feel about that? They're not going to appreciate the way that's presented. Whereas if you go in from a sincere point of view and just say, okay, we're all busy, we're all overwhelmed. We know that there's lots going on we have to keep our eye on. And unfortunately, this has happened. It's something that, happens in some of my other customers too. And, we've been able to get around that. And whilst it's a pain that, you've got to go through this process, I'll be as helpful as I can for you. And I'll aim to make sure that whatever happens moving forward, that you minimize this kind of thing happening again, or if possible, completely cut it out. So does that make sense, that kind of approach?
Yeah, it does. Well, the sounds of it, it's a lot to do with empathy and making sure you can understand how they feel, and then not take advantage of it, but use that more to kind of, I suppose, help them feel like you understand them a bit more, rather than just coming in as a tax professional and saying, you've done this wrong, this is how much it's going to cost you, because that's not helpful for their, I suppose, mindset, is it, around it either?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so a little scenario here. So let's say that you've spotted that there's an opportunity to help a client in some way, and you've briefly spoken to them about it and might have even quoted for the work. We have already talked about follow-up a little bit, but how should follow-up best be done to not come across as that pushy sale? Okay,
so there should be, with the nice thing about what you do and what I do is that there's processes that work really, really well for us. And the better we follow our processes, the better things go. So part of this process is that we work in some additional questions. So if we say are putting together a quote, my final part of that process, if we're at the quote stage, is to say, great, what do you need to see in the quote? What do you not need to see in the quote? Because there could be, it's about making the information, marketable to the people that you're looking to appeal to. And so they may help you to actually tailor the information so that the people who are going to be reading it and considering it are going to be most receptive, because it speaks to them. So that's one piece. You can make the quote relevant and sort of tailored for the audience themselves. So that will increase the likelihood of that quote being considered. The other thing you can do as well is explicit, and it's just by saying to them, great, I'll get this quote together for you. I'll send it to you by whenever. And then if you think about what happens to it from there, it ends up in their inbox. And if their buy-in is good, then it's going to be a reasonably high priority for them, so it'll get their eyes on it. Or if there's lots going on in the business or something's cropped up since we spoke, it's going to disappear down the inbox. So we need to gauge their understanding, get a better insight into what's going on behind the scenes. So it's the fly on the wall thing. And how you do that is you just ask, I'll send that to you. It'll be hit with you by such and such. When will you have a chance to review it?
Okay.
So that's when will you have a chance to review it? And that's really, really helpful stuff, because if it's something they want to act on quickly, they'll say, well, if you can get it to me by tomorrow or by Monday, I know that we've got a planning meeting on Tuesday. I can get an answer to you by Wednesday morning. So now you've got beautiful insight into their decision-making behind the scenes. And so now that steers you with when to follow up. So you can then ask this really nice human question afterwards, which is, great, when should we next speak then? So they've just told you, planning meeting Tuesday, we'll probably get an answer by Wednesday. Great, when should we next speak? Give me a call at 11 o'clock on Wednesday. Absolutely, I'll do that. So as we're professional, we'll make sure that we do call them, and whatever happens, don't miss that call. Because people are so busy. If they don't take your call, it's not because they are necessarily avoiding you, it's because they are so overwhelmed. And I'd even go so far as to send them a calendar invite, a little invite, an Outlook invite, for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And once you've spoken to them, to whiz that across, and that then cements the interaction. So, you deliver because you're effective and you're professional. So that proposal or that quote is with them in their inbox by the Monday. They take it to the planning meeting on the Tuesday. It gets discussed. And then on the Wednesday, 11 o'clock, they've already had the calendar invite. They've accepted it. So therefore, the likelihood of them being able to take your call is increased because they've committed to that calendar invite, and they haven't had something come up in the meantime, which has then meant they've had to decline. So we're just deepening, if you like, our insight into how they work and their processes and their preferences. But at the same time, we're hugely increasing the odds of us working with them.
So I think the fact that you've probably organised that meeting with them will obviously increase the chance to speak to them at that date to follow up, as you've said. But just playing devil's advocate a bit, what if they don't pick up that phone and you don't get to speak to them then? What could you do in that scenario? Because I'm sure that does also happen quite a lot.
Definitely. Yes, yeah. So we can do everything right. We can ask the best questions. We can follow our processes, procedures. We can get the responses. We can get the insights. We can put these mechanisms in place. But we're still dealing with human beings, and things can crop up in people's businesses, or something can go on kind of personally. For whatever reason, something will get in the way. In which case, say I've got a call with you at 11 following your planning meeting yesterday, and we don't get to speak at the 11 o'clock despite the fact you've accepted my calendar invite. I wouldn't leave a message at that point with you at the 11 o'clock. Instead, I'd think, okay, well, perhaps there's another meeting that's overrun or something else has got in the way. And I'd look to give you a call a bit later on in the day. And perhaps if you didn't pick up the second time, I'd leave you a voicemail and just say, oh, hey, Jack, I hope the planning meeting went well. I was calling back as promised to get your opinion on what we were discussing. And please give me a call back on my number. And I'd leave it with them then for a couple of days. And I expect you're going to ask then, okay, what do you do next?
Of course. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they haven't responded within a couple of days, the risk is that we start to kind of lose faith, and we think, oh, oh no, they've gone with another route, or, it didn't get put on the agenda, or, something else happened. It's fine to call back a couple of days later because, perhaps they did get our voicemail, they intended to call us back, and they got overwhelmed with a whole lot of other stuff that came into their inbox, and they got pulled onto another call, which they hadn't anticipated they'd be on, and so on and so on and so on. In which case, the intention is for them to get back to us. And I don't know if you've ever called someone or heard back from someone, you've prompted the interaction, and they go, oh yeah, hi Jack, yeah, you're on my list today. Sorry about this, been absolutely snowed under, and it's that thing of, yeah, you're on my list. So, that list is fluid, isn't it? It gets reprioritized, and sometimes our thing gets moved down. So by calling them and by prompting the interaction, we've just popped ourselves further up the list, and we just saved them the job of calling us. So that's the way I'd approach that. If they still don't reply, I would drop them an email. The most important thing is to get the email opened, and so the way to increase the odds of that are to make sure that you put the subject as one of their key motives, one of the key things that you were talking about with them, one of the things that's a priority in that conversation you were having with them.
Yeah.
So if it can be really tangible, the better. And that shows also that you're aligning with them, that you're a partner. So first of all, that increases the odds of it getting opened rather than it falling down the inbox. And then what you want to do is again, go down the empathy route. Don't blame them by saying, well, despite the fact that we arranged a calendar invite, and then I called you an hour later, which you ignored, and then I called you again 2 days later, which you again ignored. I'm now emailing you. They don't need that. And that's not going to be helpful for us. In which case, it's far more better to say, look, I appreciate things get really busy. We were talking about this, whatever the piece was. I understand you've had your planning meeting on Tuesday, and I'd love to get your opinion on what we were talking about. Can you let me know when's best for us to do that? Mm-hmm. And hopefully they would then reply back and say, hi Jack, I'm so sorry about this, got snowed under. Can we speak Thursday afternoon? And we've picked the interaction back up.
And they've shown interest at that stage, haven't they? So then presumably keep on going. But one of the situations that I've come up with quite a few times actually is where I keep getting a hold of the clients to talk about the potential quote that we've given them, etc. Yeah. And they keep willingly speaking to us, but let's say it's been going on for say 3 months and you're not really getting forward at all. Is there a kind of a kind way to ask whether they're no longer interested without sounding kind of rude? Because sometimes it will save their time because they won't have to keep looking at your emails or picking up your voicemails. You won't have to keep calling them, etc. It just seems like a winning scenario, but not an easy thing to ask.
Yeah. So I would suggest that that's definitely a conversation. Again, because our biggest piece of influence is through our voice. So we can ask kind of bolder or more challenging questions more easily by voice or in person without it getting misinterpreted. Whereas if we ask a bolder or more challenging question by email, it can get lost in translation. So definitely good to do it as in person or over the phone. And I'd ask and just say, okay, appreciate, there's potentially lots going on in your business. We've been talking about these things. I just wanted to get an idea of, where as a priority, where does this, sit for you with you and your colleagues, or for you as a business? How important is it for you to move forward with this, or is it, or are other things that are taking precedence over it? And you're giving them the opportunity perhaps to share that information. If you ask that question, they're more likely to give you a response, versus if you just kind of keep moving the conversation along, hoping. Yeah. So I would do that.
Because it's not a good use of anyone's time, is it, as you say? So that's a good way to put it, actually, is just to ask how much of a priority is it? Because, if they say it's not much of a priority, then you've kind of got your answer there, haven't you, that they're not really interested at this moment in time. And I'm guessing at that point you can also ask, is it still something they are interested in the future? And then can you get back in contact with them in the future, but just, give them a sufficient time for it to become a priority again?
Yeah. There are, I don't know if you have scenarios in your world where you just get complete radio silence. So, no matter what you try, being as professionally persistent as you can, so not overdoing it. The key to this is to be professionally persistent as opposed to being a nuisance. If you vary the types of communication, by phone, by email, or even if you're connected to them on LinkedIn, then a LinkedIn message. It's just a case of being where they are at the time. But sometimes we just don't get anything. And I have a technique called the ultimatum email, which increases the odds of you getting a response. And what you do is you say to them in that email, I appreciate things get really busy in your business. We were talking about this topic, and I just wanted to understand if you could just let me know A, B, or C, which of the following applies to you. And so you say, A, it's still something that you'd like to look at, but you need to revisit it at a later date. Please suggest when we pick it up. B, you've decided not to go ahead. Or C, you'd still like to do it and you'd like to arrange a conversation to move it forward. So you can adapt that, depending on the conversation you've been having, whatever the topic is, and your business. Worst case scenario is they come back to you and they say, sorry, Jack, it's B. At least to back off and to perhaps move on somewhere else. Or it could be A, they're just mega busy, but they give you a kind of a rescheduled time to pick up. Or it could be C, great, here we go.
I think people probably get scared to say that they're no longer interested, and that email or communication does make it much easier for them to then say it, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Good technique, the ultimatum email.
Yeah. And it does work. It does get results. Not everyone responds to it. That's the thing. None of this is absolute. Anything we've been talking about, none of it's absolute. If we use it in the right way, we're increasing our odds. But at the same time, it could be that it doesn't get the desired effect. But if on 10 of those scenarios you send 10 of those ultimatum emails, you might get 3 back, but at least then you've got insight which you didn't have before.
Yeah, I suppose that's all you can ever do with sales, there really, isn't it? Is increase your chances, because at the end of the day, as we've talked about numerous times, you're still working with humans, so you can increase your odds, but you can never make something definitive, can you?
Yeah, and there is something to be said as well about that, Pete, going back to that bit I said about professional persistence. If you think about the scenario that, perhaps there's yourself and, another that have been talking to them about that topic and looking to help them with that. If you've got being professionally persistent, trying different things, coming up with different scenarios and solutions, and trying to be helpful, versus the other provider and versus the other provider, and you're kind of top of mind because you've got that more effective approach, they now will start to resonate with you. They'll start to sort of think, well, actually, it looks like these people do actually want to serve us. They do actually want to work with us, because they seem much more keen and curious than the other provider and the other provider. That's a good signal to me. Okay, well, I'm the trust's forming for me there. Whereas if you think, I don't want to trouble them, I'd better leave them alone to make their own decision. One of the other providers might just have one other interaction and just purely catch them at the right time. And then they think, yes, let's go with you guys. So so being professionally persistent and actually following up, it shows that you actually want to work with them, and that you believe that what you're doing is the right thing, and that's why you're following up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the things for people who work in tax and accountancy as well is they're so used to just knowing exactly how to do something to get the result they want. And when it comes to sales, it just doesn't work like that, does it? Unfortunately. And that's probably one of the reasons that people also feel apprehensive, which we touched upon at the start. Just got another kind of scenario for you, which I think comes up quite a lot again. So let's say you've got a client, or we've got a client that you or the firm already provide services to. Maybe it's in a different tax team or something, but you are providing services to them already, and you kind of spot an opportunity to support them and add value in other ways, and you might want to discuss this with them. Because I think that is, when you've got someone as a client already, it's much easier, I think, to talk to them about another opportunity. But what I've tended to see is that tax people will shy away from doing this because they feel like they're being pushy, or that they're putting too much on the client's plate at once. But do you think, generally speaking, it is a good idea to discuss these and bring it up with the clients? And is there a way that this can be approached well?
Yeah, and I think the way to do it is to do it in a soft way, in a gentle way, rather than go, oh, I need to talk to you about this because you must need to do that, and because you're this type of business, so you're going to have this. That's just the awful stuff. What would be better would be to say, okay, something that you might want to consider is this, and I just wanted to make you aware of some of the options which you've got when considering this. Is it okay to have an initial chat about that, so that I can get your opinion on this, if this is the right thing or not for you? So you're giving them lots of choice. You're not telling them that it has to be this way, and you're allowing them to, if you like, feel empowered that they're the one that's making the decision about it, even though it's something that they hadn't considered before. So I believe that not going in too confident and assertive is important there. I think it is. Okay, here's something for you to consider. Here are the options. Let me know if this is right or not for you. And the people far prefer that kind of approach, and that's an ideal way to open up that conversation. And as the questions that you ask and that you get their responses, the trust builds, and then you can really impart the quality of the advice that's within you.
Yeah. I mean, how would you go about that initial communication? And would that be an email, do you think? Would it be in person, or is it really dependent on the scenario?
I think it's dependent on the scenario. If you've got an existing customer, you probably have a feel for how they like to communicate. So for some people, they do 10, let's say out of 10 interactions, 7 out of the 10 of them might be by email. Or it could be the opposite, that they're more of a phone person. So it might be that 7 out of the 10 interactions are by phone, and then 3 out of 10 kind of clarify and confirm what you've talked about. So you can probably judge it by your past experience. But at the same time, if you feel like it's something that's a real priority for them and you have to share it with them, I would say, pick up the phone and say, I appreciate you weren't expecting my call. There's something I wanted to make you aware of, and I wanted to have a chat with you to talk you through it. And I wondered, when would be the time to perhaps, schedule that chat, or if you're free now, perhaps we could talk through it.
Yeah.
So there's various ways of opening it up. And again, it might be, depending on who they are and what kind of business they're in, they could be on all sorts of platforms. So for some people, if they're out on the road, it could be that that's done by text, or it could be that if they spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, that it's a LinkedIn message. We just have to think about what appeals to our audience. Mm-hmm. But I would absolutely never hesitate in bringing the subject up for them. The risk, if we don't, is that they get to hear about it through another channel, and then think, well, hang on a second, isn't this something that Jack's business normally does? Why hasn't he spoken to me about this? Well, now they've got a seed of doubt about their relationship with you, and that's something we really don't want. So what I say to people in this scenario, perhaps if they have got apprehension about making them aware of other facilities or other services, is to say, you provide those services. How would you feel if you found out that your customer went to, another provider and took up those services that you absolutely can do a sterling job of providing? Oh, I feel gutted. I'd hate that. Oh, I'd be so disappointed that I haven't told them about it. And also, they'd probably be disappointed that I hadn't shared it with them. So it's the right thing to do to share it with them. And then it's up to them to decide how they respond.
It kind of sounds like it's about making it as beneficial for them as well when you first bring it up with them, rather than making it about you. Kind of, would you kind of try and briefly explain why you think it might be of benefit to them, or would you think that would be too much at the initial stage, seeing if they're interested in speaking about it?
I think you have to, you need to give them the reasons why you think it's beneficial. So you need to align it with their motives. So it's a case of saying, oh, Jack, I thought of you because, one of the areas we help our customers with businesses similar to yours is this by arranging this provision. And the reason that I felt that might work for your business is because you do this, blah, blah, blah. And so I just wanted to check with you, is that the right sort of thing? You're not saying I've made this decision for you. You're alluding to the fact that it's likely that it would be relevant for their business given a particular motive which you can, which you can refer to because of your relationship with them.
Yeah. Just one final question for you then, Martyn. So we've talked through a lot of points here about sales, which I think all of which will be useful for anyone who takes a listen. But have you ever, what's the best piece of advice that you've personally been given in relation to sales?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the best piece of advice I was given was early on in my sales career. It also is similar to some of the stuff we've just been talking about, where I worked in a bank and we could do something for the customer, and I hadn't presented it to them as an option. And so my instinct was to say to my boss at the time, oh yeah, they've decided to go down this route. And he then said, okay, well, what about if you were to do this route? You presented that to them. And I then said, well, no, but because we've really talked about this route, and they seem to think that's a good idea too. And he said, well, but you haven't talked to them about it. Well, no, I haven't. No, but we've kind of decided on this. And he then said, well, there's something that they're not aware of, and you've got that insight into it, but you've now decided that that's the best thing for them. And I went, okay, because you need to call them back and just say, hey, I've just had a further idea for you. I know we were talking about this, but I wanted to let you know about this other thing. And I really didn't want to do it. And I was fighting him, but I was like, no, we've decided to do this, and I've got all the paperwork ready, and they're expecting it, and they were really busy, and we already took longer than we expected. Because I know, but you really need to share it with them. You really need to tell them, because if it turns out the first thing you did, they decide to go for that, still after that conversation, that's fine. But otherwise, this could be better for them, for them. And so reluctantly, I picked up the phone and I called them back and I went, oh, hi, it's Martyn here. After we spoke, I was looking at some further options, and I had a further idea for you. And I know we've already spoken at length about all this stuff, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this. And as it was, they went for the second thing that I called back about. So I learned my lesson from there. If we've got additional information for them, we should not be afraid to call them back. Now, it might be that the additional information that we share with them isn't relevant, and they say, hey, Jack, thanks a lot for letting me know about it, but I'll stick with what we've already talked about. Or they might say, actually, yes, that's really helpful. I'm glad you called back. Okay, please do. And that can even manifest in other parts of our process. It could come in with a quote. There could be a further idea we have with a quote or a proposal. And what we absolutely must never ever do is add something in a proposal or a quote which we haven't already discussed with them. That's so important, because when they receive that quote or proposal, that should directly reflect the conversation that we've had with them. Because if they're looking through it and they go, yeah, that makes sense, we talked about that, oh yes, there's that bit, I was looking for that, okay, great. Oh, what's that? Oh, I don't remember talking about that. Now, straight away, we've got a seed of doubt coming in, some sort of uncertainty with our conversation together, and that's not helpful. So if we have a further idea for them, or we feel like something else can be added to the quote to provide more value for them, we should make sure that that's the right thing by calling them or emailing them and saying, hey, I had a further idea for you, how about this? And then we get their response. If it's yes, we add it in. If it's no, we absolutely don't add it in. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I suppose on the flip side, let's say you didn't give them that extra option, and then a few years down the line they realised that was an option and it was better for them. They're not going to be particularly happy, are they? And that's one thing I've definitely taken. One of the big points I've taken away from this today, anyway, is ask. Just always ask. Asking is your best friend. All right then. So, Martyn, if the listeners want to find out a bit more about you and your advice, where can they find out a bit more about you?
Yeah, they'd be very welcome to do that. So I'm Martyn Sloman, which is Martyn with a Y, and the business is Gold Dust Training. So my website is www.golddusttraining.co.uk. You can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. There's also some content there in terms of short videos, some articles and blogs. And equally, there's some other content on the website, or they can also find my contact number on both those channels too. So yeah, be very welcome to hear about what people's challenges are.
Lots of great information provided there by Martyn, which I'm sure will help you to become better at winning client work, importantly without being pushy. Why not put some time aside over the next week to think of one client who could benefit from a service that you aren't currently providing them? Use the advice provided in this episode and get in contact with them to let them know about the opportunity and find out if they are interested. This may make you feel uncomfortable at first, but I believe the best way to learn is to be put outside of your comfort zone. Take me and this podcast, for example. Show notes can be found at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP11, which includes details of where you can find out more information about Martyn. That's it for this episode. Until next time.